Have you ever wondered what the soul of someone who truly trusts God looks like? Not someone who just says they trust, but someone who actually abandons every fear, every need to control, every desperate attempt to understand why things happen the way they do. What would that soul look like to someone who could see past skin and bone and into the spiritual reality underneath? In 1577, a 62-year-old nun sat in her cell in Toledo, Spain, writing under orders from her confessors. Her name was Teresa Sanchez de Cepeda d'Ávila y Ahumada. She had been told to put down on paper what God had shown her about the interior life of the soul. Her hands were worn from decades of manual labor in Carmelite convents. Her body was tired from founding 17 convents across Spain in 20 years. But her pen moved fast because what she was describing was not theory. It was something she had seen with her own eyes, in a vision so clear that she would say later it was more real than anything she had ever touched with her hands. And in the very center, in the deepest room of all, the King of Glory himself, blazing with light so pure that it illuminated every room, every wall, every corner of the castle. The closer a soul got to that center, the stronger the light became. The farther away, the dimmer it grew, until at the very edges, outside the castle walls, everything was foul and dark and crawling with serpents. God had shown it to her as an intellectual vision, meaning she perceived it not with her physical eyes, but with a clarity that was even sharper than physical sight. She saw the soul as it truly is, and what she saw changed how she understood everything about trust, abandonment, and the terrifying beauty of giving yourself completely to God. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, drawing from Teresa's own autobiography, The Life of Teresa, of Jesus, completed in 1565, The Interior Castle, written in 1577, and the testimony of her confessors, including Father Domingo Bañez, who reviewed her manuscripts and added his own notes to verify their authenticity. Now, back to the information. Teresa was born on the 28th of March, 1515 in Ávila, Spain. Her father, Alonso Sanchez de Cepeda, was a wealthy wool merchant. Her mother, Beatriz de Ahumada, died when Teresa was 14, leaving 10 children behind. Teresa was the third child. Her family had secrets. Her grandfather, Juan Sanchez de Toledo, was a converso, a Jew forced to convert to Christianity. The Spanish Inquisition had condemned him for allegedly returning to Judaism, forcing him through a humiliating public ritual that destroyed his reputation. The family moved to Ávila to rebuild their social standing. They bought a knighthood, they married into nobility, they buried the past. Trust in anything other than God could cost you everything. And maybe that shaped her. Maybe that made her understand, earlier than most, that the only safe place to put your trust was somewhere they could never take it away. Their uncle found them on the road outside the city and brought them back. The adventure lasted maybe an hour, but it tells you something about the intensity burning inside her, even as a child. This was not a girl who did things halfway. Then her father decided she needed structure and sent her to an Augustinian convent as a boarder in 1531. She stayed 18 months. She hated it at first. Then something shifted. Her uncle gave her the letters of St. Jerome to read, and those letters planted a seed that would not leave her alone. But because, as she would write later, she wanted to choose the safest course. She was terrified of hell. She thought the convent was the best way to avoid it. Her father refused to give permission. So on November 2nd, 1535, she left his house without telling him and walked to the Carmelite convent of the Incarnation in Ávila. 140 nuns lived there. It was lax. Rich nuns had private apartments. They kept jewelry. They kept pets. They entertained male visitors in the parlor for hours at a time. This was not the strict contemplative life most people imagine when they think of nuns. This was comfortable, social, lukewarm. They put wax on her eyes in preparation for death, but she did not die. She returned to the convent, and for the next 18 years, she lived a split life. She prayed, but not deeply. She followed the rules, but without passion. She spent hours in the parlor talking with visitors. One visitor in particular disturbed her, though she told herself there was no sin in it because everyone else did the same thing. She gave up mental prayer, using her poor health as an excuse. Later, she would say that this excuse was not sufficient, that nothing should have made her abandon something so good. From that day, she wrote, she began improving in her spiritual life. She returned to mental prayer. She never abandoned it again. One confessor told her that when she saw a vision, she should make the sign of the cross and repel it as if it were an evil spirit. She obeyed. But the visions kept coming, and they brought with them, she said, their own evidence of authenticity. It became impossible to doubt they were from God. She saw the sweetness with which words came from his divine mouth. Sometimes the words were tender, sometimes they were severe. She longed to see the color of his eyes, to describe them later, but she never could. When his gaze fell on her with great tenderness, her soul could not endure it. She fell into such a deep trance that she lost the vision entirely, only to experience it in an even deeper way. In chapter 40 of her autobiography, written between 1562 and 1565, Teresa describes one particular vision that became central to her teaching. She was reciting the office with the whole community when her soul became suddenly recollected. It seemed to her all bright as a mirror, clear behind, sideways upwards and downwards. In the center of it, she saw Christ our Lord as she usually saw him. She saw him distinctly in every part of her soul, as in a mirror, and at the same time, the mirror was all sculptured in our Lord himself by a most loving communication that she could never describe. Conservation of its being. In heretics, the mirror is broken in pieces, which is worse than being dimmed. But for a soul not in mortal sin, the Lord is constantly present, giving us being, reflecting himself in the very substance of who we are. A soul that has stopped trying to hide anything, stopped trying to control anything, stopped demanding that God explain himself before it obeys. God is closer than your own breath, nearer than your own thoughts. The journey to union with him does not require traveling across the world or performing extraordinary feats. It requires looking inward with brutal honesty and allowing him to shine light on everything you have spent your whole life trying to keep in shadow. 20 years of lukewarm prayer, 20 years of holding back parts of herself, 20 years of friendship with God that was real but shallow because she was terrified of what full surrender might cost her. She wrote about this with ruthless honesty. She said she was attracted to one visitor's company even though it disturbed her peace. She said she abandoned mental prayer even though she knew it was wrong. She said she wasted time and talents she could have given to God. In 1567, Teresa met a young Carmelite friar named John of the Cross. He was 24 years old. She was 52. She convinced him to join her reform movement. Together, they began establishing discalced Carmelite convents and monasteries across Spain. Discalced means barefoot. It symbolized the return to simplicity and poverty that Teresa believed the Carmelite order had lost. The reform met fierce opposition. For 4 years, a storm raged that threatened to destroy everything she had built. Her letters from this period described the terror, the confusion, the sense that God had abandoned her right when she needed him most. When God seems silent, even when the outcome looks impossible, even when your body is breaking down and your enemies are closing in, and you cannot see how any of this will end in anything but disaster. But she was not finished. In the last 3 years of her life, she founded convents at Villanueva de la Jara in 1580, Palencia in 1580, Soria in 1581, Burgos and Granada in 1582. 17 convents total in 20 years, all but one founded by her, as many men's monasteries, all of this while battling chronic illness and opposition from within her own order. In October 1582, Teresa was traveling from Burgos to Alba de Tormes. She was 67 years old. She was suffering from uterine cancer. The journey was too much. She stopped at the convent in Alba and took to her bed. On October 4th, she died, or October 15th, depending on how you count it. Spain was switching from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar that very week, and the dates, October 5th through October 14th, were excised from the calendar entirely. So she died either just before midnight on October 4th or early in the morning of October 15th. Her last words were recorded by the nuns who attended her. "My lord, it is time to move on." Well then, may your will be done. On September 27th, 1970, Pope Paul VI declared her a Doctor of the Church, the first woman to receive that title. Her writings, particularly The Interior Castle and The Life of Teresa of Jesus, are still considered essential guides for understanding the mystical life. The soul that trusts God completely becomes a clear mirror in which Christ is perfectly reflected. The soul that holds back, that tries to control its own spiritual progress, that demands to understand before it obeys, remains clouded and dim. In the first mansion, you're just beginning to pray. You know there is something more. You feel drawn to God. But you are still easily distracted by the world outside. Toads and vipers still creep through the outer walls. The light from the center barely reaches you. Half of you wants to surrender everything to God. The other half is terrified of what that might mean. You trust him with your eternal salvation, but not with your daily life. Teresa said that many people get stuck in the third mansion forever. They are good Christians. They are not living in mortal sin, but they never experience the deeper union God wants to give them because they are not willing to let go completely. God begins to draw the soul inward in a way you cannot produce by your own effort. The will is captured by God. The mind may still wander. Distractions may still come. But something inside you has been touched by a divine hand, and you know you did not make it happen. This is terrifying, because it means you are no longer in control. You cannot decide when this prayer happens, or how long it lasts, or whether it will ever happen again. You can only open yourself to it and wait. Teresa compared it to a silkworm spinning a cocoon and dying inside it, only to emerge as a butterfly. The soul that enters union with God comes out transformed. It can no longer live the way it did before. But you also experience the dark night, periods where God seems to withdraw completely, where prayer feels like shouting into a void, where you're convinced you have lost everything and will never find it again, where people accuse you of being delusional or demon-possessed or a fraud. Teresa spent years in the sixth mansion. She said the pain was so intense that she sometimes wished she'd never started the journey at all. The seventh mansion is spiritual marriage. The soul enters the innermost room of the castle where the King of Glory dwells in the greatest splendor. This is permanent union. The will is brought into complete conformity with the will of God. The soul no longer experiences the wild swings between ecstasy and abandonment that marked the sixth mansion. Instead, it rests habitually in God's presence. Martha and Mary live together in harmony. The active life and the contemplative life are no longer in conflict. Prayer is no longer an event that happens at certain times. It is an uninterrupted conversation with the beloved that continues even while you are washing dishes or founding convents or dying of cancer. Total abandonment, complete trust, absolute surrender of your need to understand, your need to control, your need to protect yourself from suffering. She saw all her actions reflected in that diamond, every thought, every word, every hidden motive. It was a fearful thing to see so many things together in that brilliant light, and it was most piteous to see such foul things as her sins present in the pure brilliancy of that light. Every time you said you surrendered while keeping one hand on the steering wheel, every fear you hid, every doubt you nursed, every plan you made just in case God did not come through. He sees it all, and he loves you anyway. He is waiting in the center of the castle, in the seventh mansion, blazing with light so pure that it transforms everything it touches. He has been waiting there your entire life. He will wait there until you die. The question is whether you will make the journey inward through all seven mansions, or whether you will spend your entire life in the outer rooms, saying you trust him, but never really letting go. Making real progress toward union with God. And what she saw convinced her that the greatest obstacle to spiritual growth is not lack of knowledge or lack of effort. It is lack of trust. I will obey in this area, but not that one. I will pray, but only if it makes me feel good. I will surrender, but only if you promise not to ask too much of me. Let me love you the way I have always wanted to love you, without any barrier between us, without any part of you hidden from me. Trust is looking at God and saying, I do not understand what you are doing. I'm terrified of where this is going. But I am not leaving. I'm not pulling back. I'm not protecting myself. Do whatever you need to do to bring me to the center of the castle, no matter how much it costs. She saw an angel beside her, small in stature but very beautiful, his face burning as if he were one of the highest angels. In his hand he held a long spear of gold with a little fire at its tip. He appeared to thrust it into her heart and pierce her very entrails. When he drew it out, he seemed to draw them out also, and to leave her all on fire with a great love of God. The pain was so great that it made her moan. And yet so surpassing was the sweetness of this excessive pain that she could not wish to be rid of it. The soul is satisfied now with nothing less than God. It ruins you for the shallow satisfactions that used to be enough. It strips away every pretense, every defense, every carefully constructed version of yourself that you thought God wanted. And what is left is just you, naked and exposed and terrified, standing in front of the mirror of God's love and seeing yourself reflected in his eyes. Do what best stirs you to love. Love is not pleasure. Love is a decision to will the good of another even when it costs you everything. Love is trust taken to its final conclusion. Love is looking at God and saying, I do not need to understand. I do not need to feel good. I do not need to know how this ends. I only need to know that you are good, and that is enough. She wrote these words while sitting in her cell in Toledo, her body breaking down, her enemies circling, her reform movement hanging by a thread. She had no idea that everything would work out. She had no guarantee that the discalced Carmelites would survive. She had no vision promising that she would live to see her work established. She wrote from the sixth mansion, in the middle of the storm, with nothing to hold on to except the certainty that God was worth trusting, even if he asked her to give up everything. Teresa founded her last convent in Burgos in 1582, just months before she died. She was exhausted, sick, in constant pain, but she went anyway, because she had learned that trust means obeying when you do not understand, working when you cannot see the outcome, giving everything you have, even when it looks like it will never be enough. Her heart shows the marks of the transverberation, the wound from the angel's spear. It is exposed there for the veneration of the faithful, a physical testimony to the reality of what happens when a soul trusts God completely. In the autobiography that lays bare every struggle, every failure, every moment of doubt, in the interior castle, which maps out the journey of the soul with such precision that people 500 years later still use it as a guide. She wrote in the middle of founding convents. She wrote while traveling. She wrote when she would rather have been praying. And because she obeyed, because she trusted that God knew what he was doing even when it made no sense to her, millions of souls over 5 centuries have found their way deeper into the castle because of her words. But clear, transparent, willing to be filled with light even when the light exposes everything you wish could stay hidden. Willing to enter the center of the castle even when the journey requires passing through rooms you would rather avoid. Willing to let go of control, let go of understanding, let go of the need to protect yourself, and simply say to God, "Here I am, do with me what you will." She saw the beauty of a soul that trusts. She saw it in visions. She saw it in herself as she made the journey through the 7 mansions. She saw it in the nuns she guided, the ones who took her teaching seriously and allowed God to transform them. She saw it in John of the Cross, her partner in reform, who understood trust in a way that few people ever have. And she wrote it all down so that we could see it too. Understanding the theory of trust, studying the 7 mansions, reading every word Teresa wrote, none of that matters if you do not actually make the journey yourself. If you do not actually walk away from the outer rooms where it is safe and familiar. If you do not actually let God strip away the layers of protection you have spent your whole life building. If you do not actually trust him enough to say, "I do not know where this is going, but I am coming anyway." She had endured opposition, persecution, chronic illness, and the dark night of the soul. And at the end, when it was time to move on, she was ready. Because she had spent her life learning to trust. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but deeply enough that when God called her to the center of the castle for the last time, she could go without fear. The vision she recorded in chapter 40 of her life remains one of the clearest descriptions ever written of what the soul looks like when it is fully transparent to God. Christ in the center, filling the mirror completely, front and back. Every corner illuminated, no shadow, no hidden place, no part held back. Just complete, radiant, terrifying beauty. The beauty of a soul that trusts. This is not reserved for saints. This is not only for mystics or nuns or people who have visions. This is the destiny God has planned for every single human soul. Every person who has ever lived was created to be a clear mirror reflecting Christ. Every person is meant to reach the 7th mansion and dwell there in permanent union with God. The only thing that stops us is our refusal to trust. Our insistence on staying in the outer rooms where we can still control things, still understand things, still protect ourselves from the cost of real surrender. She desperately wanted to see the color of his eyes, to describe them to others, but she never attained to the sight of them. Every time she tried to look more closely, she lost the vision altogether. His gaze was too strong. Her soul could not endure it. She fell into such a deep trance that she lost the beautiful vision in order to have a greater fruition of it all. He was a Franciscan friar, known throughout Spain for his holiness and his gift of discernment. Teresa's confessors brought him to examine her visions. They wanted someone with experience in mystical theology to determine whether she was being deceived. Peter spoke with her at length. He examined her writings. He questioned her about her prayer life, her mental state, her motives. Then he told her confessors that there was nothing to fear. The visions were from God. The fruits in her life proved it. The transformation of her soul proved it. The way she was growing in humility, charity, and obedience proved it. It freed her to trust what God was showing her without constantly second-guessing whether she was deluded or proud or demon-possessed. It freed her to move forward with the reform of the Carmelite order, which she had been planning in secret but had been too afraid to attempt. 13 nuns lived there under strict rules of poverty, enclosure, and contemplative prayer. No private apartments, no jewelry, no pets, no visitors in the parlor, just work, prayer, and silence. The nuns went barefoot as a sign of their return to the primitive rule of the Carmelites. They owned nothing. They begged for their food. They spent 4 hours a day in mental prayer. It was radical. It was controversial. And it was exactly what Teresa had seen in her visions. For months, the outcome hung in balance. Then the storm passed. Permission was granted. The convent of St. Joseph's was allowed to continue. And Teresa began planning the next foundation. By the time she started founding convents, she was in her late 40s, and her body was already breaking down. But she kept going. Because trust meant obeying God's call even when it made no sense, even when it cost her everything. She finished it in 5 months, writing mostly at night after long days of managing convent business and dealing with endless conflicts within the reform movement. She wrote quickly. Her handwriting was terrible. She crossed out passages and rewrote them in the margins. But the teaching was clear. 7 mansions, each one a stage in the soul's journey toward complete union with God. Each one requiring deeper trust, greater surrender, more willingness to let God strip away everything that stands between you and Him. But because she wrote from experience, she described what she had actually seen, actually felt, actually lived through. And that raw honesty, that refusal to pretend it was easy or clean or safe, made her words pierce the heart of anyone who read them. A castle containing many rooms, with the main dwelling place in the very center where the most secret exchanges between God and the soul take place. If we reflect, she said, we shall see that the soul of the just person is a paradise in which God tells us he takes his delight. What must that dwelling be like in which a king so mighty, so wise, so pure, containing in himself all good, can delight to rest? Nothing can be compared to the great beauty and capabilities of a soul. However keen our intellects may be, they are as unable to comprehend the soul as to comprehend God. For as God has told us, he created us in his own image and likeness. As this is so, we need not tire ourselves by trying to realize all the beauty of this castle. Although being his creature, there is all the difference between the soul and God that there is between the creature and the creator. The fact that it is made in God's image teaches us how great are its dignity and loveliness. Because she had seen what they were missing. She had seen the blazing light in the center of the castle. She had tasted the sweetness of union. She had experienced the wound of divine love that ruins you for everything else. And she wanted everyone to know it was possible. Not easy, not comfortable, not free from suffering, but possible. Just trust, the willingness to enter the first mansion and begin praying even though you have no idea what you're doing. The willingness to move from the first mansion to the second when God invites you, even though it means leaving behind familiar patterns and people who do not understand. The willingness to keep going through the third, fourth, fifth, sixth mansions, even when each one requires letting go of more control, more understanding, more safety, until you reach the seventh mansion, where God is waiting, and you realize that everything you let go of was trash compared to what you have gained. Whether you will trust him enough to enter the dark passages between the mansions, whether you will keep going when prayer feels dry and God feels distant, and you cannot see any reason to continue, except that he is worth trusting even when nothing makes sense. She saw it in the mirror of her own soul as she made the journey from the first mansion to the seventh. She saw it, and she wrote it down, page after page, year after year, until her fingers were cramped and her body was dying and her work was done. Solo Dios basta. God alone suffices. It was dated 1562, the same year she experienced the transverberation, the same year she began her reform of the Carmelite order. She carved those words into the wall in the middle of the storm, before anyone believed in her, before her work had borne any fruit, before she had any evidence that trust would lead anywhere except to more suffering. God alone suffices. That was her answer then. That was her answer at the end. That is still her answer now, 500 years later, for anyone willing to listen.